Start off with why intelligence matters. And the best way for me to express this is that the adversary is becoming better at what they do. And we as defenders are becoming less capable of stopping them. So they are getting better, we are getting worse all throughout the globe. And here's the best way for me to illustrate this. What you are looking at is some actual intrusion statistics that we were able to derive. And what you will notice is that nation state activity is remaining relatively consistent, but the e-crime activity is rising and rising. So why is this? Honestly, probably the most significant reason is ransomware. Ransomware operators are getting better at what they do. They're able to increase the amount of attacks. They're able to succeed at higher rates. And every time they succeed, others also jump in and they also want to start doing it as well. So like I said, overall, the adversary is becoming better and we are becoming collectively less capable of stopping them. So of course, this begs the question, why? Why are they becoming better and why are we not as good at stopping them? And what I would argue is that we're having a problem, we're having issues identifying the problem that we're trying to solve. And the best way that I can illustrate this is a quote from my good friend Einstein, who once said that if he had 1 hour to save the world, that he would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving it. So this is what Einstein would do, right? He would spend a lot of time trying to define the problem, to understand what it is. But yet in the cybersecurity industry, we kind of do everything backwards. Instead of trying to define the problem, what we do is we spend money first. We spend money on expensive solutions to solve problems that we do not understand. And then we have all these solutions. And now we're getting alerts and detections and incidents, and we're responding to things back and forth, just responding to all these different things. Yet we still do not understand the problem that we're trying to solve. And then we're surprised. We sit there and suddenly we get breached and we're wondering, well, why did it happen? I bought all the right tools. I had all the right staff. I had a CISO. I had a SIM. I had endpoint protection. I had all these things. Why did I get breached? Why did it happen? And what it really comes back to is we don't understand the problem that we're trying to solve. And that is the purpose of intelligence. The purpose of intelligence is to avoid strategic surprise by understanding the relationship between us and the adversary. And ultimately, that is our goal, right? This is a relationship. There is us and there is an adversary. And we want to understand the nature of that relationship, because when we don't understand that relationship, we keep getting surprised. Whereas when we understand what's going on and we understand what our adversaries are doing, we're in a better position to respond to threats. So on that note, let's look at the core components of threat intelligence. So in order to talk about this, we're going to think a little bit about conflict theory and how conflict works. And in general, when you're in a conflict, there are 3 core elements that you want to understand: mind, body, and actions. And this could be any conflict that you are in. It could be a sports match. So if we're playing soccer, again, mind, body, actions. Fist fight, mind, body, action. Same thing, right? It doesn't matter what kind of conflict you are in. And to kind of talk more about this, let's look at the kind of the sports match. If you and I were playing a sports match against each other, it would be a function of the mind. So who has better team strategy? Body, which team is more physically fit? Actions, which team has better game time execution? Same with the fist fight. The mind, which fighter was more mentally prepared? Which fighter possessed greater endurance? Which fighter threw the better punches? And the same thing with war. From a war perspective, which army had the better strategy? Which army was better equipped? Which army better executed on the field of battle? You'll notice that no matter the conflict you are in, there's always mind, body, action. Also, before I continue, I would ask that everyone please mute their microphone. If you are not talking, please mute your microphone. Thank you. So moving on, let's apply a cyber lens to this concept. So we talked about the mind, body, and actions, and now we're going to think about ourselves and the adversary. And once again, there are 3 levels to this, right? You have the strategic, which is the mind, operational, which is the body, and tactical, which is the actions. So at the highest level with threat intelligence, you want to understand the strategic layer, which is sort of like the kind of the mental stuff. So what industry are we in? Which assets are we trying to defend? So if you're oil and gas, then your ability to produce oil and gas is the most important thing you can do. If you're a telecommunication provider, then your ability to provide telecommunication services is the most important thing that you do, so on and so forth. That's the first layer of understanding. The second layer of understanding is which adversaries have motive and intent to come after you. Why might somebody want to harm your interest? What is the reason that they might want to do that? What is the motive? What are the things that they might do in order to come at you? The next layer is the operational, which is the body. So this is thinking about, what are we comprised of? People, process, technology. And what you will notice on the adversary side is that they have capabilities and infrastructure. So from a capability perspective, you want to ask questions like, how will they use malware against your technology? How will they socially engineer your people? How will they exploit vulnerable processes? And then if the capability is the bad thing they're going to do to you, the infrastructure is where it's going to come from. So things like IP addresses, domains, so on and so forth. And then lastly, at the lowest level, the actions or the tactical, you want to think about how the adversary is going to get in. So from a digital perspective, how will they exploit vulnerabilities? How will they engage in strategic web compromise? From a physical perspective, maybe they'll just drop a USB off, or maybe they'll do a supply chain attack. And then from a psychological perspective, it could be things like social engineering, or it could be something like bribery. And then we want to think about the TTPs, or the tactics, techniques, and procedures that they're going to use against these things. So again, at a high level, from a threat intelligence perspective, this is what you want to understand. You want to understand who you are as an organization, and then you want to understand who your adversary is and what they're going to do against your organization. So let's think about this. Let's look at some examples of the adversary. So we're going to look at several examples of this. So from like a motive perspective, there could be ideological motives, economic motives, security motives. From an intent perspective, thinking about what they're going to do to us, it could be extortion, which is like ransomware. It could be a destructive attack. It could be espionage. From a capability perspective, thinking about things like malware, distributed denial of service, social engineering. And then infrastructure is, again, where it's coming from. So like botnets, C2, spam, hostile IP addresses, VPNs, proxies, as well as malware as a service that enables a lot of these capabilities. And then from a TTP's perspective, we want to figure out exactly what they're going to do against us. So things like physical device compromise or phishing, lateral movement, vulnerability compromise, we want to understand the exact moves they're going to make against us. So again, at a high level, our goal is to understand this bigger picture here. And we want to think of it across the strategic, operational, and tactical layers. So on that note, let's actually look at some best practices. So probably the best way to think of intelligence is to take those three stakeholder types, the tactical, operational, strategic, and think about the people behind them. Think about the organizations that you are serving. So from a tactical perspective, I would think of these as system maintainers, kind of like the mechanics, the ones that are maintaining your SIM, your firewall, your endpoints, IDS, IPS, and they want intelligence to engage in better automation, detection, and alerting. From an operational perspective, these are the people that work in a SOC, and they want intelligence to make them better at their jobs. Whereas the strategic stakeholders, these are people that are decision makers, and your decision makers want to leverage intelligence to make better decisions. So let's look at examples of each of these and figure out how we can kind of operationalize it. So this is the tactical intelligence best practices. And like I said, tactical intelligence is about helping defensive systems, so like the SIM, firewall, endpoint, so on and so forth. And here are three principles for tactical intelligence. The first is around having comprehensive defenses. We want to leverage intelligence to push our defenses out throughout the environment. We want to take the indicator feed and we want to put that into SIM. Can you please mute yourself if you are not talking? Thank you. So we want to take indicators and YAR and snort rules and put those into the SIM, the firewall, endpoint. We want to be able to have comprehensive defenses throughout the environment. And then we want to be able to automate some of that content as well. So for example, I don't want to have to manually do this. I want to be able to push indicators to the SIM, to the firewall, to the endpoint. I want to do all that automatically, because if you do that automatically, then you can spend more time on critical thinking. The third principle over is integration. So this is where you want your defensive systems to be integrated with intelligence. For example, if you have an endpoint detection, then you not only want to see the detection, but you want to see the context around that detection, what the actor is doing, the indicators associated with the detection, the actors associated with the detection, so on and so forth. So let's look at an example of this. So what you're looking at is all the different tactics and techniques and procedures and malware that we saw throughout 2019 from e-crime adversaries. And what I've noticed when working with organizations is sometimes they get too focused on one thing. So for example, I only care about ransomware, or I only care about phishing, I only care about the dark web. So you always want to be focused on a variety of things. You want to focus on the larger life cycle. And the reason you want to focus on the larger life cycle is oftentimes the same actor will do many things to you. So for example, let's take how a typical threat might work. Maybe it starts with a spam bot. The spam sends a like something like a downloader, something like Emotet. They double click on Emotet, and maybe Emotet, what they do is they monetize that access in a criminal underground form. Maybe they give it to somebody who has a banking Trojan, maybe an adversary like Wizard Spider, who leverages the TrickBot banking Trojan. And then with TrickBot, what they'll do is they'll seek to do two things. The first is they'll maybe use Anchor DNS to see if you have any information they can steal. Or maybe if they find your domain controller, they'll leverage ransomware, the Ryuk ransomware. So in that example, literally 7 different things happened. So if you want to stop ransomware, you actually have to stop everything before the ransomware. You have to stop the banking Trojan that led to the ransomware. You have to stop the downloader that led to the banking Trojan. You have to stop the phishing email that led to the downloader. So it's a big cycle, and that is one of the things that intelligence helps you do, is understand this cycle. So in terms of the what next, what we can do about this, I would be thinking about how your organization is consuming timely and relevant indicators. So when you think about your indicator feed, you want it to have 2 characteristics. You want it to be timely and you want it to be relevant. Timely indicators are things that are happening right now. Things that are not timely are things that happened a month ago, a year ago. If you're using stuff from a month or a year ago, then the adversary has already moved on. You want to be as close to now as possible. And when I say relevant, what I mean is based on attack telemetry. When you're using open source stuff, that open source stuff is no longer based on current attack telemetry. The reason indicators are on open source is because somebody found them and somebody already used them, and now they're putting them out there for the rest of the world to have. But the smart adversaries, the ones that are really intelligent, they're going to move on very quickly. So you want an indicator feed that is both timely and relevant. And you also want to think about how you can automate the malware analysis process. Let's go back to the example that I gave. Let's say you were to find TrickBot in your environment and you were to quarantine it. Immediately, you want to understand exactly how TrickBot works. You want to understand the other malware capabilities it's associated with, because your ability to gain a rapid understanding of that is what will allow you to be proactive and defend against the subsequent attacks. Next, we're going to discuss operational intelligence best practices. And again, the operational intelligence are basically the people that work in a SOC. They do the day-to-day operations. So like vulnerability management, incident response, SOC, threat hunt. And once again, we have 3 principles. So the first principle is what I call the common operational picture. The common operational picture is the ability for everyone to see the same problem the same way. For the VM team to see the same problem as the incident response team, to see the same problem as the SOC team. When everybody sees the same problem the same way, you can act in a cohesive manner. You can act in a united manner. Whereas when everybody sees the problem in different ways, then this guy's doing something while this guy's doing another thing and that guy's doing something else. So that's one way to use intelligence, is to have a common operational picture and see the same problem the same way. The next method, the next best practice, is to use intelligence to empower the SOC. So when I say empower the SOC, what I mean is make everybody better at their job. So for instance, I should be getting intelligence on the adversary and using that to help vulnerability management. Whatever the adversary is exploiting, whatever vulnerabilities they're exploiting, are what the vulnerability management team should prioritize remediating. Or for incident response, instead of going in blind to different incident response engagements, what we want to do instead is use intelligence to give the incident responder a head start. So that way, when they're responding to something, they can reference something that has happened to a peer or something that has happened elsewhere, and then go in with an enhanced level of information. Or like the SOC, for example. So oftentimes when I'm building programs for customers, the SOC analysts, they'll just sit there and respond to things, respond, respond, respond. The challenge of only responding is that if you only respond, eventually you will be surprised. So one way to leverage intelligence for the SOC analyst is to leverage that intelligence to figure out what's going on elsewhere, and then to build use cases to detect for those things within the environment. Also, you want to leverage intelligence to be proactive. So when I say proactive, I mean the opposite of reactive. We don't just want to react to things. When you react to things too much, that is when you will eventually get surprised. So for example, with the threat hunter, Ideally, what we're doing is we are consuming intelligence from what's happening to other entities, and then we're engaging in proactive threat hunt missions. So, for example, if I see a breach that happened in an organization that looked exactly like my organization, I should be getting intelligence from how it happened, and then I should be threat hunting for all the signatures associated with that breach in my own environment. That way, I can be prepared against these future threats. So let's look at a practical example for this. And what we're going to do is we're going to review a lot of the things that have happened over the last quarter. So in the upper left, you have ransomware as a service. We're seeing a lot of ransomware as a service. And essentially what this is these major ransomware operators, they're now creating something called an affiliate program. An affiliate program is where they will affiliate themselves with up to about 25 different affiliates. And instead of just doing the ransomware operations by themselves, they now give the ransomware to the affiliate. So as you can see, there's a problem to this. Let's say there's 10 major ransomware operators, and let's say they all have a ransomware as a service type arrangement. Now, instead of 10, there's 250. And with 250 things, that's a lot of stuff to stop. And it's not that the ransomware as a service variants are fundamentally different from the ransomware variants, but each of them is slightly different in terms of the life cycle leading up to it. So slightly different banking Trojans, slightly different downloaders, slightly different phishing, slightly different hands-on keyboard techniques. And the more of these things that happen, the harder it is for us to understand from a defensive perspective how to stop it. The next area over is what I call situational phishing. Situational phishing is when you take advantage of a high notoriety event. So the most common one that is happening throughout the world right now is COVID-19 based phishing. And what situational phishing is with COVID-19 is basically it's two parts. So the first part is they spoof an authority figure. So for example, like the World Health Organization or Centers for Disease Control or the Ministry of Health for Saudi Arabia or whatever it may be, you spoof this authority figure. And then once you spoof the authority figure, then you send a message that has a sense of urgency. So for example, it could be something along the lines of, I have a document, and inside this document is the list of your people who are infected with a new strain of COVID-19. If you don't open this and if you don't see who it is, then it's going to be highly infectious and it could affect other people. So they're sending a lot of things like that, things that really strike to the heart, that strike to the fear of people. Because the more you go after people's fear, the more likely you are to get them to make irrational and irresponsible decisions. So that's what we're seeing a lot with situational phishing. This one down here is living off the land techniques. So we're seeing a lot of hands-on keyboard techniques as opposed to malware. And when I say hands-on keyboard or living off the land, I mean things that do not leave files behind. So for example, using legitimate credentials to log in, to engage in a remote login, or PowerShell, command line, modifying legitimate binaries on the system, RDP, PSExec, all of these things do not leave signatures. So because they don't leave signatures, they're able to evade antivirus, signature-based antivirus. So we're seeing them prioritize that a lot. And then also attack surface enumeration. That's another big one. So what is happening because of COVID-19? Well, a lot of us are working at home. And if we're working at home, what does that mean? It means we're using the internet more. And if we're using the internet more, it means we're sending more emails. We're using our mobile devices more VPN connections, more RDP connections. And the more we use the internet, the bigger the attack surface becomes. And the bigger the attack surface becomes, the easier it is for adversaries to target our interests. So from a SOA perspective, you want to be able to use intelligence to connect the dots. See, because it's one thing to kind of just see this one thing, but it's another thing to take an observation and then connect it back to the bigger picture. And when I train customers how to do this, I train them on two disciplines: campaign tracking and threat actor profiling. Campaign tracking is your ability to track a threat actor across space and time. So from a time perspective, you want to figure out, what did they do a month ago, 2 weeks ago, now? And then from the spatial perspective, against whom did they do it? Where did they do it? And you will notice that as you track this threat actor across space and time, you will notice that they behave in a predictable manner. And your ability to understand their behavior and your ability to predict what they are going to do next is what allows you to be proactive with your cybersecurity measures. The next threat intelligence discipline that I teach in this area is called threat actor profiling. Threat actor profiling is the ability to take one of these things that you are seeing and then connect it back to a much bigger picture, connect it back to the threat actor themselves. So instead of just ransomware, connecting the ransomware back to the TTPs, back to the infrastructure, back to the motive. And you'll notice that when you gain a more complete understanding of the threat actor, then you can look at the various little things, the tactical nuances. You can look at the TTPs and figure out the different things of how to stop them. So from a what next perspective, here are my recommendations at this level. I would strongly recommend that you engage in Yara and snort rule based threat hunting. And the reason I say that is Yara and snort rules are able to analyze malware and behavior at the behavioral level, as opposed to the signature level. When you can analyze the behavioral level, what it allows you to do is get much deeper in terms of analyzing malware, and it allows you to defeat malware that is able to modify its appearance, things like polymorphic malware or custom compiled malware. The ability to engage in behavioral alerting and detection allows you to find these things that are changing their appearance. My other recommendation is using intelligence to prioritize vulnerabilities. So instead of just prioritizing whatever we want to prioritize, using intelligence on what threat actors are exploiting and then prioritizing those things. And then my last recommendation for this slide is to use threat intelligence and TTPs to build SOC monitoring use cases. We don't want to wait for things to happen to us. We want to build use cases to proactively search for these things before they happen. The last area in this section is around strategic intelligence best practices. So when we think about strategic intelligence stakeholders, we're thinking about decision makers and strategic thinkers. We're thinking about our leaders. And the easiest way to think of what strategic stakeholders need intelligence for is to make better decisions. So there are three big areas that I work with my clients. The first is around spending. So this one's very simple. If you're going to buy something, if you're going to spend lots of money on a solution, then you should spend this money on a solution that's going to defeat your adversaries. If you don't know what your adversaries are doing, then how can you spend money on the right solution? The next area over is around security organization. So think of it like this. You are managing an organization. You are organizing, training, equipping, and preparing. The best way to do this is to understand what you are preparing against, to understand what the threat actors are doing, who they are, what their capabilities are, what their infrastructure is, what their TTPs are. Your ability to understand that makes you better at organizing, makes you better at training, better at equipping, better preparing. Whereas when you don't understand those things, it's like you're just closing your eyes and hoping for the best. We don't want to close our eyes. We want to understand what we are preparing against. And the last one is around strategic decision making. So this is useful for businesses. And here's a way to think of it. Businesses often do not make risk-based decisions. They often make very business-like decisions. So one way to leverage intelligence is to help the business understand risk, to help them understand the risk of actions, to help them understand, well, hey, here's why I need funding for this thing. You funding this thing allows me to prevent this much bigger risk. So that is something that intelligence also helps you do. It can also help you gain funding to combat threats. So let's look at a practical example from a strategic intelligence perspective. And one way to think of this is to look at kind of like, okay, looking at the different actors and figure out which ones you want to focus on. So you can use strategic intelligence to focus on the right actors, because not every single actor is going to target your organization. So for example, with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is very likely to be targeted by Iran. You are much less likely to be targeted by South Korea, and much less likely to be targeted by Vietnam. So you want to be thinking about, okay, well, who is likely to target me? Which ones have the intent? Which ones have the capabilities? And then we want to be able to think about, okay, well, based off these intent and capabilities, who do I need to prepare against? And this isn't something that necessarily remains still or static. This is something that can evolve over time. For example, with the criminal actors are very good these days. And, for a lot of reasons, right? The reasons that we discussed. We talked about advanced ransomware capabilities. They have better penetration capabilities, and they also, in many cases, now have nation state support. So with the strategic point of view, sometimes things change, and you want to be able to track the way these things change in order to best prepare your own environment. In this next section, we're going to talk about integrating and automating intelligence with endpoint protection, because our goal here is not only to consume the intelligence data and make better decisions, but ideally we can automate it and we can be faster, we can be stronger. So let's talk about how we can do that. So up through now, we've discussed a variety of things. We've talked about using adversary TTPs to help security operations make better use cases. We've talked about gaining intelligence on adversary exploits to help the vulnerability management team be better at prioritizing vulnerabilities. You can use threat intelligence to empower the incident response process, as well as a sandbox to help them analyze the artifacts that they encounter during the incident response engagements. You can do strategic briefings for your leadership, indicators and snort rules for your network devices. And then lastly, what we're going to talk about with the endpoint is we're going to talk about the different things that we can do at the endpoint level to better automate the process and be stronger and faster. So on the note of faster, here's one way to think of this. We need to be able to operate very quickly. And one of the terms that CrowdStrike uses to track this is something called breakout time. Breakout time is how long it takes the adversary, once they are in your environment, to move laterally and to achieve their objectives. So for the breakout time, for the first 8 steps, you'll notice it takes somewhere around 2 to 5 hours for your more sophisticated actors. But once they achieve that breakout, once they're able to go lateral, now they're able to achieve their objectives. So with CrowdStrike, we have a rule. We call it the 1-10-60 rule. And with the 1-10-60 rule, what you want to do is you want to be able to detect something within 1 minute. You want to investigate within 10 minutes, and then you want to be able to respond within 60 minutes. So intelligence helps you investigate very, very quickly. And that's what we want to use intelligence for, because the detection portion is automated. The response portion is what your team does, but the investigation portion, that's what can make or break your ability to successfully respond to the threat. So that's the question then, is how do we rapidly investigate anomalies with intelligence capabilities? So with CrowdStrike, we have a capability called Falcon X. And Falcon X is the first and only intelligence capability to automatically synthesize endpoint detections with threat intelligence. And we're going to talk about 2 use cases for how we do this. The first use case is around enriched detections. So the way it works is you can start by having a detection. And then what you want to do is you want to be able to enrich it with indicators, actor profiles, reporting. So in addition to this detection, you want to know much more about it. Your ability to understand more about detections as they are happening without having to manually do the research will quickly speed up your ability to investigate and therefore respond to threats. And then with this automated enrichment, now you're able to engage in enhanced threat profiling. So when you see a detection and then suddenly you know who the actor is that's associated with it, now you can ask a very critical question, which is, what else? What else do I need to worry about? I saw this one detection, but this one detection is associated with these other threat elements. And if it's associated with these other threat elements, then I need to be able to respond to them in a timely manner. The other area is around quarantine, about the ability to detonate quarantine files. So the first element of this is you actually quarantine the file itself. But then when you quarantine a file, you don't want to stop there. And that's where a lot of other solutions stop, which is problematic. You want to be able to keep going. You want to be able to find out more. So what CrowdStrike's Falcon X does is it'll automatically detonate the quarantine file. And then once it detonates the quarantine file, you now have a series of analysis on it. You can see the MITRE attack framework analysis of what it does. You can see the threat actors it's associated with. You can see behavioral risk indicators. You can see associated IP addresses. So that way, in addition to blocking the malware, now you can also block the command and control infrastructure associated with the malware. So again, my goal with presenting this particular slide is you don't just want to focus on the thing happening to you. You want to gain additional information about the thing that's happening to you. And then using that additional information, you want to be able to quickly act and speed up the investigation process. Because again, what is our goal, right? We want to detect, we want to investigate, and then we want to respond. Your ability to investigate very quickly is what intelligence is going to help you do. So that is something I think that we should be focusing on, is how do we best leverage intelligence to speed up this investigation process? So let's discuss kind of the way forward, right? What are some next steps? What can we actually do about this? So, the first part is just understanding, kind of going back to the beginning. We are inevitably linked to our adversary, and we want the ability to understand what our adversaries are doing. So we talked about a lot of things today. We talked about ransomware as a service, talked about situational phishing, living off the land. So all those, those fileless techniques like the command line, PowerShell. We talked about how adversaries are trying to evade our detection systems by using these signatureless techniques. And then we talked about the attack surface enumeration. We talked about how we're using the internet a lot more because of COVID-19. Again, more emails, more mobile device usage, so on and so forth. So intelligence is what helps you understand these things, because without intelligence, basically it's like you're closing your eyes and it's like none of it's happening. And without intelligence, the only thing that you know is what's happening in your environment. And even with that, even when you see the things in your environment, you are only seeing a fraction of the truth. So our goal is to be here. We want to see what's in our environment and then understand everything beyond it. We want to understand the actors they're associated with, the capabilities they're associated with, the TTPs, so on and so forth. Whereas we don't want to be here. We don't want to be in a situation where we can only see what's in our environment. So, the challenge then, of course, is how do we leverage threat intelligence to open our eyes to the link between ourselves and the adversary? And that is ultimately our goal. We want to be able to go beyond what's just happening right here. And we want to understand, a greater picture. We want to understand what's happening to our peers. We want to understand what's happening in our country, because your ability to understand what's happening to your peers and to your country is what allows you to make better decisions within your own environment. So if you wanted to conduct threat intelligence, there are basically 3 different areas. We call them capability areas at CrowdStrike. And those capability areas help you cover yourself, the adversary, and that thing in between that we call the internet. So with intelligence, what you can do is you can engage in threat enrichment. Threat enrichment is the things that helps you empower your own environment. So like indicators, YAR and snort rules, sandbox. For the middle portion, for the internet, and when we say the internet, I mean the surface web, the deep and dark web, and social media. For this area, you want to engage in digital risk monitoring. And then lastly, with the adversary, you want to understand their motive, intent, capability, infrastructure, and TTPs. Specifically those 5 things: motive, intent, capability, infrastructure, and TTPs. And your ability to understand those 5 things and consume threat reporting on those will get you into the mindset of the adversary. And the more you are in the mindset of the adversary, the more you can think like them. Your ability to think like them will allow you to preempt their behavior. So, with Falcon Threat Intelligence, there's a variety of capabilities that allow you to do this. You want to be able to operationalize intelligence to strengthen defenses and decision making. So we talked about a variety of layers, right? We talked about the tactical stakeholders, or your frontline defenses and systems. And with this, our tactical intelligence capabilities include our real-time IOC feed, YAR and snort rules, and tailored API feeds. For our operational capabilities, this is your capacity to basically engage in intelligence that helps the analysts and the operators, the people that work in a SOC. And here are the different capabilities that can help them. It could be IOC attribution, malware sandbox, an adversary and TTP library, intelligence reporting, malquery, and then custom RFIs. And then lastly, at the strategic level, you want to be able to leverage intelligence that helps people make better decisions. So again, with the strategic decision-making capabilities, what we're looking at here is sector-specific reporting, adversary campaign analysis, and custom RFIs. Overall, if you take anything away from what I said today, you want to be able to engage in intelligence across these 3 levels: tactical, operational, and strategic. Your ability to engage in intelligence across these 3 levels is what allows you to get ahead of the adversary. And CrowdStrike has lots of capabilities that can help you do that. So if you are looking for more information, we want to help, right? And if you are looking for more information, go ahead and take a screenshot of this here. So falconxsales@crowdstrike.com. And if you email that address, one of the Intel sales team will answer, and they'll help you get started with the intelligence capabilities. So thank you everyone for your time. Appreciate it. I don't know if we're doing questions or not, or are we just kind of cutting it here? So this is for the organizers. Do you guys want to do questions, or are we just kind of cutting? Khalid? Hello?
I think you might have dropped off, Jason.
Okay. Well, that's the end of the presentation. So thank you everyone for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason.